be ready to go.
Begin. Welcome everyone out to our work session meeting this morning. I apologize for the delay in getting started. Ms. Upchurch, would you lead us with the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yep. Vicki, are you going to put the flag up? There we go. I pledge of allegiance to the flag, the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Have board member comments. Ms. Upchurch, we'll start with you.
So let me make sure I'm good. Okay, so actually my comments are pretty brief. I was going to give the board a quick update. We had a DAC meeting on Friday to cover for the last one of the year, to cover our statutory requirements for the DAC to advise on the budget. There's a lot of really good feedback. We tag teamed. I covered. Well, first of all, we haven't had a DAC meeting since the shutdown. So, and that was right when we started working on our big rocks and our goals and our long-term strategy. So I shared our update on that. I shared our big rocks and going forward. And then Mr. Cruz shared our budgetary discussions we've had to date and where we are and with the state and the state of the district, so to speak. And then Dr. Summers shared the overall bigger picture of the district. And I thought that everybody had a lot of good input and feedback. Some of the feedback that we got from some of the DAC members was wanting to make sure that we stay competitive as a school district when we have a lot of universities that are going to be waiving those SATs and ACT scores. How do we make sure that we are still relevant and making sure that both Palmer Ridge and Lewis Palmer High School, while they're both already excellent schools, making sure that our students are in a position to be competitive in their pursuits for career and college going into the future. Another thing that was communicated was the concern in making sure that as we're going forward with our budget discussions, that we are being very mindful of the need for mental health and counseling, especially going into the fall, since we don't know the unpredictability of everything going on, especially for our kids. That piece of our budget is essential. Dr. Benton also shared slides that she'd shared with us as a board, but it was something that I gleaned from it was making sure that we're not forgetting about that other 20%, that 20% of our student population, and how do we serve our kids? How do we remain competitive? How do we make sure that we're reaching and teaching each child right where they are? So that was a really good discussion as well. And I think that the takeaway from DAC was a lot of folks see and hear what we're doing as a district. And one of the things that was also emphasized is to please make sure that we're communicating as we're going through our budget discussions and our cuts and looking at what the state is sending us, that we are communicating to our constituents and our stakeholders and our parents and our teachers our whys and our hows, and that we are staying really on top of that communication piece. There was a lot of kudos to Dr. Summers for his weekly updates, but just making sure that we as a district are communicating with all of our stakeholders in how we're moving forward and why. And Christy Milks is the new co-chair for DAC. Susan Hunter Smith has turned out, so Christy Milks was voted in, and so her and Annette Walker Smith are the two co-chairs for DAC for the next year. And I just want to, as an individual, as a mom, and as a board member, want to again, I can't reiterate enough how much collaboration and teamwork has gone into making sure that we're doing the best we can in these unprecedented and uncertain times. And I want to make sure that as we're moving forward, that we're attending to the needs of all of our students, our special needs students, our students who are on the autism spectrum, who have sensory issues, our students who need consistency and need to feel safe in order to learn, and that we are being mindful of our staff and our teachers. Also at the DAC meeting, one of the teacher representatives from Kilmer expressed that the staff, it's important to them that we are taking care of them. They would rather see us cut their pay before they see us cut each other, if that makes sense. So making sure that we're being mindful for our students and our staff. And I just thank you, Dr. Summers, and thank you, team, for working really diligently and hard to make sure that our impact is staying as far away from the students and the staff as we can. So I appreciate that.
Phillips.
I think I heard Phillips. Is that me? Am I next? I lost Matt's audio. Can others hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. So as I've listened to our discussions, especially the last two sessions that we've been together, there have been some things that have become more clear to me, but on the other hand, there are other things that I'm grappling more with. And I think that it's important for our community to know that that process is occurring in such a way that we're all in this for the long haul, and we're doing everything we can to take in all the information that we're getting week by week and day by day to make the best decisions that we can with regard to our school district and first and foremost, the education of our kids. I think it's important that people realize how many hours and the intense thought that's going into all of this, and just in a way, hopefully that's reassuring to our community and to those of us, or to those who, especially who have reached out to us via email, phone call, text. I'm personally hearing from quite a few people, and I'm grateful for that, because engagement will only be additive for us. And I think in all of our discussions, they have been consistently guided by the idea that our children's education is paramount. We are making decisions with that first and foremost. And even though there might be specifics of those decisions that people in our community might disagree with, please know that we're doing everything we can to provide the best opportunity for our next generation. And again, I just want to thank those people who have reached out, and please feel free to reach out and engage if and when you would like to.
Mr. Clausen, we can't hear you.
I still don't have audio.
Might I suggest maybe Ms. Namika just continue where Mr. Clausen would have gone around the table so that we can keep moving?
Absolutely. Mr. Schwartz, what comments might you have?
I just made them.
All right, Mr. Taylor.
Community.
Ron, were you finished?
Chris, thanks. Yes, I am.
All right, so let me just add that the fear that everyone felt in March when this major shutdown of the economy occurred, I think has changed, at least from my perspective and many people's perspective, that we probably are not, the COVID-19 virus doesn't appear to have been as deathly as it may have originally appeared to be. It also, data suggests that it is the higher risk we have as individuals, whether it's respiratory problems or age problems or immunity system problems, are very much susceptible to the worst outcome of the virus. But all the data I've seen is it's not as impactful to people that are under age 30. In fact, very few cases, very few, if you look at it as a statistic. However, every case is a person, so I don't want to understate what I'm trying to communicate. But the reality is we have a lot more information today than we did 3 months ago. And the information suggests, I think, and hopefully will inform our school district as we proceed forward to the fall, what the options might be. Like Teresa said, I appreciate all the communications we've received from community members, and it's across the whole spectrum. Some people won't put their kids back into school, and some people wonder, why are we not just having regular school again, and everything in between. And it's going to take a collaborative approach to come up with what the options are. And I think our governor suggested some sort of hybrid model. I don't know what that might look like. I know Dr. Summers has been doing his research and collaboration with other superintendents, et cetera, to try and do what's best for our school district. All of that I'm very grateful for. I'm grateful that it's not as bad as we thought. Now, I say that knowing people who have lost their lives personally, knowing people who have contracted the virus. So at an individual level, if you're impacted, it's serious. But as it was presented at the time of the shutdown, it's not as serious as they led us to believe, which I'm grateful for. I'm also grateful that Dr. Summers and his team has helped the board focus on the long term and to look at the values and the vision of the school district. I will be working with the new CFO, Shauna, I believe her name is. Hopefully I didn't get that wrong. And trying to put together a forecast, a long-range forecasting model that will be more of a flexible forecasting based on current information, because in these times, information seems to change daily, if not weekly, if not hourly. So given that, we're going to look at a long-range strategic planning model, and the current time frame ahead of us, the current 12 months would always be, hopefully, our budget. So coming into next year, when we do our budgeting process, it'll just be the next 12 months out of a 5-year model. And that will help, but again, I'm not going to make any excuses or pass any judgment on what we've done this year, because no one could have predicted what has occurred in the last 3 months. And I, again, know that Dr. Summers and his team have done a tremendous job in providing us information, and it's much appreciated and noted. And I look forward at the same time to looking at things long term and looking at our school sites individually and collectively by elementary, middle school, and high school, and then the central admin and how it best supports our schools, which ultimately our entire system, the more healthy it is, the better it is for our children and for our teachers and our parents, etc. And with that, I'll pass. Thanks.
Hey, Matt, you're on mute. You're still muted.
Mr. Schwartz?
There you go.
Okay.
I heard him.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Mr. Schwartz, just want to make sure there's nothing else you wanted to add before we moved on. I know I was having some issues with my phone.
Thanks, Mr. Clausen. I just wanted to maybe reiterate what fellow board members have already said. Your children are your most valued possession and most important part of our country's future. We've all volunteered to do these jobs and all the creativity that the team has to drive that success on a consistent basis. And we have no intention of allowing this pandemic to get in our way. It's going to be a challenge. We're going to do things somewhat differently. There are some laws we have to abide by from departments of health, et cetera, which if you're on the call, you'll hear us discuss today. But at the end, we're unified as a staff and a team to ensure that we drive that success on a consistent basis and maintain and grow the quantity and the quality of the education that the children of our community deserve and are going to receive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. I also want to thank my fellow board members for your comment. I too appreciate the communications that we received from the public, the emails. As a board member, it's very helpful for me to have that information. You know, as a parent of 3 kids in the district, there's no one that would be happier than my wife to send all 3 kids back to school in the fall. However, with that being said, we always need to do what's best for our kids. And so I want to reassure the parents that, you know, we have the common goal to return our kids to a more normal schedule. But with that being said, their safety is paramount concern of ours, and we will continue to do everything we can to protect them on one hand, and also on the other hand, provide a top-rate education. So, Dr. Summers, we'll turn the time over to you for comments.
Okay, Mr. Clausen, I appreciate that. And actually, if I could just defer any specific comments at the moment into just our discussion items for the agenda, I think that would be most appropriate because there'll be quite a bit for us to discuss.
Dr. Summers.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Mr. Taylor, could you hear me?
All right, perfect. Well, with that being said, we can okay. Everyone nod your head if you can hear Dr. Summers okay? Okay, I think we're good, Dr. Summers.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, let's move on to the next agenda item, budget development update.
Okay, Mr. Clausen and the board, thank you for the opportunity to provide this information and update to you. So what we will be doing—
Dr. Summers, we can't hear you.
I can hear you.
I can hear.
Some can and some can't, apparently. So I want to make sure that I am being heard by everybody. Mr. Clausen, can you hear me now?
I think it's just a delay.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll do the best we can to wade our way through this. And as I was prefacing our—
You're well heard over here, Dr. Summers.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. Well, what I'm about to do is actually pass it right off to you here. So I just wanted to tee this up for everybody so that we're all working from the same page. So as we understand that there's quite a bit in front of us still, as we have been working with so much information to prepare the 2021 finalized budget, which we are still in progress with. Today was an opportunity to give you all an update related to those figures and how our numbers are coming in from the state and how we're working through difficult decisions to best position ourselves as we start next year. With that in mind, and echoing the same comments that you all started with this morning, I thought it was best, so that our public also has the opportunity to hear this, to reframe or realign back to where we have been starting this conversation around our strategic plan. And there have been efforts that I know different board members have put some time and work into. And so with that said, I wanted to give Mr. Schwartz an opportunity to actually be the voice that will talk or take us through the next series of slides related to our strategic plan alignment. So with that said, Mr. Schwartz.
Okay, got it. I got some feedback that my voice is a bit delayed. Can you guys respond to me if you're hearing everything okay, or at least a couple folks?
I'm hearing you.
Yeah, I believe we can hear you all right.
Thanks. Okay, so if you're following along in the slides, let's move right to slide number 3. And slide number 3 is, what's the rationale of why we're doing this?
Vicky, go back one. Sorry, Mr. Schwartz, go ahead.
Okay, and there's 4 reasons why we're doing it. Essentially, we need a track to run on. We want to make sure we have a track that the community can understand, that's predictable, that we can achieve, which are the executable behaviors, and then make sure it's consistent as we move forward and up and to the right, both in quality and quantity, and we get the outcomes that our children and our staff deserve, and then that we continue to grow our transparency so that any member of the community can dive in at any time and understand where we are in this journey. Next slide, please. The core tenets are really the key values that the district has always had, but we've tried to put it in a very succinct set of bullets that summarizes the why we're doing and the how we're doing. Finally, slide 5 on teeing this up is, what does success look like? And it's providing a world-class education so that every student can be a valued member of their community and hopefully our country. In order to achieve that, slide 6, please, we have our 5 major goals and priorities, which we nickname Big Rocks. And they are the 5 you see on these slides. And for each of those, there's a team, both at the administrative senior staff level of the district and on the board. And on the board, there are 2 members on each team, such that if one isn't available, that the other can act on their behalf and vice versa, so that we never lose momentum, regardless of actions in someone's personal life. And so we've taken these 5 core tenets and broken them down into milestones and timelines, which the staff and the senior and the board teams will work hand in hand on. And let's go to slide 7. And let me know when the Zoom is there, because I'm not on the Zoom, please.
I think you're there, Mr. Schwartz. We're on goal 1 there.
Thanks, guys. Yep. And each goal has this timeline. And the core team has the commitment to build those milestones and to do so in the next several months. And then the staff team has the commitment to determine what is it that you need to have in terms of tools and achievements in order to get to that milestone, and so on and so forth as you move forward. And as we go to the next slide, please, each of the core 5 tenets has the same roadmap to success. The dynamics and the needs are going to be different, but we build these into a common strategic plan that we can then plan for in terms of staffing, facility, expenses, and so on and so forth. And it provides us a simple, sound, and agile roadmap to move forward with that we can communicate easily and execute on well. And that would really take us over to slide 7. Dr. Summers, did you want to take it from there, or did you want me to continue?
I think that's fine. And this might be a good opportunity to just press pause and just facilitate any questions or additional comments from our other board members.
So I will just jump in real quick. This is also the presentation I shared with DAC on Friday. And the reason that I so appreciate you putting this together in this format, like that's easy to follow, Ron, is this isn't just this tool, these goals. I think it keeps us focused on not just being reactive to what's going on here and now with this pandemic and what education looks like through it, and what we can and can't do, and what our strengths and weaknesses are, but going into the future and building upon that. And so I think this keeps us aligned and focused and accountable to our community and to each other through self-governance as well going forward.
Maybe the one thing I might add, Dr. Summers, is that this is not the work of one individual. This really is the team's retreat work put into a simple format that hopefully everybody can leverage and understand.
Yes, I think that's an excellent point, that it is reflective of a collaborative effort. And I think the other element that we're really zeroing in on at this point, and this will be a lot of the work that we engage in both as part of our fall planning process, as well as our longer term strategic focus, will be to create specific milestones and metrics or measures that will demonstrate how we will know we will be successful. So that's where this work really leads us to next, is objectives that we can actually put data behind and to, so that we're in a position where we can consistently monitor and share what the progress toward those objectives are as a measuring stick, so that our community and every stakeholder has the opportunity to know exactly what this represents and how it is embodied in both student learning and achievement, staff performance and continuous improvements, systemic improvements, both from the standpoint of asset utilization and that financial model that we know is going to be so important, that Mr. Taylor's also pointed out earlier in his comments, and also making sure that we have a strong communication strategy around all of this with effective two-way feedback loops, so that every member of our community has an opportunity to see themselves within the plan, as well as provide actionable input that we can use and leverage as we go forward. So I think we're building back off of some of the momentum that we carried into where we had to press pause into the pandemic, and we're picking that back up now and making sure that this is a driver, so that we're not necessarily just focused on fall planning as a function of just getting ready for the start of school in August 2020, but really that ongoing roadmap that we can continue to leverage as we see this through and work in a forward direction.
Dr. Summers?
Please.
Yeah, I Ron made an interesting comment there that made me think about these 5 slides that he went through, and as he did so, I was looking at it and thinking of for example, Lewis Palmer Elementary School. All of this fits at a school level, as well as at across an elementary school continuum, or a middle school, or the high schools. I think they'll be a little different, which is good. but it's interesting to me that I actually sat and listened and thought about one school, and I thought, gosh, this really works well at a school level, and then obviously at a consolidated level for the district as well. So I appreciate, what Ron's put together, and I know it's been a lot of input from a lot of people, but I think it's a pretty good framework.
Thanks, Mr. Taylor. I think that's an excellent point in terms of alignment throughout our entire system, so that we're all pointing our arrows in the same direction. And you can see that both in district conversation and decision-making, as well as school-driven decision-making, and to what extent each school is in a position to address their unique circumstances and set of needs. But we recognize that as an entire team across all of our schools and working in partnership with our families on behalf of every student, that this also lends itself to reinforcing our one team, our team concept. So with all of that, let me go ahead and help connect this to part 2 of this presentation. So, okay, there you go, Vicki, great. So I wanted to just call out a little bit more attention to the fact that as we are engaging in budget development, we are continuing to keep a focus on our alignment to core values, as you can see exemplified within the strategic plan. So just a few to call out. And it's just nice to visualize as well as to continue to process through dialogue around this. But our students are first and foremost at the center of every decision that we'll make, including our commitment to safe, healthy, and welcoming environments, which includes holistic supports along social, emotional, physical, and mental health. Obviously, a strong focus and a commitment to strong academic learning and growth, which involves rigorous and relevant learning opportunities and consistent access to high quality instruction. And then I think we have a real opportunity as we continue to adapt to what the pandemic and the situation has created for us, is really thinking about how we are personalizing and innovating within the learning environment. And so a phrase that I want to continue to leverage throughout our community is, how do we meet every student, quote unquote, where they are at in their preparation for future success? And I think we could apply that frame to both the physical environment that we find ourselves in, whether that is in an in-person environment, or for students or families that may desire their student to be in more of an online setting. We are working currently to develop a continuum of service in that process, where we can meet those needs along a continuum. And I know that there's a lot of details still that we need to delve into to help our parents and families understand exactly what that means. But we're really serious about making sure that we are approaching not only the opportunity for the fall, but as we continue to go forward, making sure that we understand every student has strengths, desires, talents, inspirations. And as a system, our job is to make sure that we nurture those and to develop the type of responsive learning environments that can adapt to what those needs are, and to remain flexible and agile in our approach. Obviously, in order to accomplish that, we need a high performance staff in order to ensure that we are getting the job done. So that involves support for ongoing professional learning and growth. Obviously, we want to continue to look at ways that we are competitively compensating and retaining our employees. And while we know there are challenges inherent in that with our current budget climate, that's something that we do not want to lose sight of as we continue to engage in work around making sure that we're taking care of our employees. And then sort of that frame around just D38. I don't know if this is the exact phrase, but we want to be a great place to be, or a great place to work. We want to be attractive to not only the employees that we may be looking at bringing into our district, but obviously the team that is here, and continuing to nurture that growth and development. And then lastly, really connecting all of this to our broader community, which we know short and long-term financial stability and community engagement and ownership are going to be critical in this process. So really making sure that we're strengthening our partnerships with our parents and other community outreach efforts, continuing to focus on an increase in trust and transparency, not as quote unquote nouns, but really as verbs. What are the actions that are behind that? And then a regional demand to be the type of educational system that our students and staff, and again, our community want to be a part of. So I just wanted to use that frame as we shift then into our next series of slides. So Vicki, if you can go to, okay, budget to development to date. So at this point, Mr. Cruz, are you on?
I am, yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna let you and I sort of tag team the next series of slides here. So if you wanna take the first cue, I'll let you at it.
Okay, so when we talked and when we presented the draft budget, we had a base funding number of PPOR at 6952, and I multiply that out by our projected enrollment of the 6481. And when all the expenditures are done and everything, we are basically, well, let me rephrase that. Once that amount right there would be a difference of about $7.4 million from our revenue last year to this year. When we looked at what the state is intending to do, we have changed our PPOR number to a base funding of, let's see, $7,084. And that changes that's at a 1.9% inflation rate. So we changed our base funding $130. In that resulted in about a difference of $855,000. And so when we start, as far as where we are with revenue shifts, we're about $6.6 million less than the revenue that we received this year. So that's our starting point. So that had some change there. Again, these are projections. We don't know what the outcome will be from the state, but we believe that would be the minimal there. You want me to keep going, Dr. Summers?
Sure. I think just rather than go line by line on this slide, what we wanted to do is give the board an opportunity to see at a glance what each of these adjustments were compared to our original proposed budget to where we stand as of today. And as Mr. Cruz just mentioned, there are still some potential changes. We don't expect those to be drastic at this point. We think that it's more, it could be that the PPOR dollar amount that Mr. Cruz mentioned actually comes in a little bit higher. But in order for us to work toward a finalized budget, we feel confident in that $7,084 amount per student at the 6481 total projected student count to be an effective assumption as we work toward a finalized budget, keeping in mind that it could still be late into June before the state actually gives us the total final PPOR allocation that lets us know exactly where that's going to come in at. So I think that just reinforces the point that Mr. Cruz just made. And then as you can see, basically everything from the proposed column to the actual column is the same with the exception of the reductions and adjustments. So we're going to zoom in a little bit more on that. We've been able to make, I think it's fair to say that the 1.2 million leading to the 2 million that we found in reductions and adjustments represents 3 weeks or so of effort in that process to get us from the 1.2 to 2. It is not necessarily reductions across the board, but we have a slide that will go into more of that detail. What we wanted to then point your attention to is really that bottom line of our starting point when we initially built the budget. Well, to be fair, in the proposed budget, we did not have any of the CARES Act funding accounted for. So when you look at that adjusted amount of CARES down to that total reserves needed section, I think we were originally around a 5.5 number in the proposed budget. Which now is brought down to 3.1, factoring in the CARES allocation. And as you factor in the additional base funding and then the additional reductions and adjustments that have been made, that number is now sitting at about 1.5. So that was the essence of the slide that we wanted to communicate to you all.
Casey,
Dr.
can I
Summers,
just
I have
clarify?
2 questions, if I might.
Please.
So the first is the reductions, adjustments. So you've from a couple of weeks ago or a week ago, where you had 1.2 million in reductions of costs in the budget. You've now increased that to 2 million.
That's correct.
Otherwise, all of those adjustments are the same. Now, the revenue, which is the other question, is where did you come up with this? Was this just we went to the base, meaning the base PPR, and then you've increased it by, I heard like 1.9% or some percentage, which you think of as inflation. So you don't have an official word yet from the state what the PPR might be.
Yeah, let me speak to that, and then Dave, make sure I get this right.
Okay.
Based on the draft long bill that was submitted about a week and a half ago, Chris, the adjustment to that state PPOR formula was accounting for that 1.9% adjustment. And initially, when we were projecting that 15% or so, no less than the 69, what was it, Dave? 6951?
6952. Yeah.
That number we have since adjusted to the 7084 based on all of the data that we've received from the state. So even though that has not been officially voted upon and finalized, we feel like it's still a conservative and at this point a base level of what we can work from now. It may end up actually coming in a little bit higher as all of that comes out through the wash. So does that help clarify, Chris?
I could state then that the 6.6 reduction of funding from the state is still worst case based on the information we have.
That's
from
correct.
Bills that are in place.
Yes, sir.
So again, I think you've already alluded to it. Just to be clear, this is worst case still.
Yes.
May I ask
Dave,
if
that echoes what you are hearing as well. Yes. I know you have more of a direct line to some of those analysts.
Yeah, just following up with a few people at the state level, they felt like that part of the bill, the 1.9% inflationary piece adjustment, is going to remain in there. Again, like you said, Mr. Taylor, it's still worst case scenario on revenue.
may I ask a question along the lines of what Mr. Taylor asked?
Please.
So this whole concept of baseline per pupil revenue is really important here if in fact it is a bottom stop. So what I want to make sure that we as a board are unified and clear in terms of our understanding on, as well as our members of the community, is there a legal way the state can go under the baseline funding on a per pupil basis?
Not without a change to legislation.
Yep.
And how number one, did any of that happen in the 2008 to 2011 timeframe? And number two is, how easy or difficult is that to truly enact?
It didn't occur in the 2008 to 2011.
Okay, now how easy or difficult is it to enact a change to the baseline per pupil revenue funding?
It would require a vote of the public, and it would be highly politicized. And what I would tell you at a surface level is there would be several districts, including us, who would essentially be a loser in the process. And that creates some real difficulties at a state level when you are basically then taking money out of local taxes to backfill what the gap is at the state. And I don't want to get into all the ramifications of all of that, but it would be significantly politically charged.
On a 1 to 10 scale, how unlikely is it, with 10 being very, very unlikely?
Ron, this is just my opinion. Dave, I'm open to yours as well on this. I would put it at about a 7, because there's conversation about it. I don't think that the conversation is leading toward any action, but the fact that there's conversation, which there typically is anyway, always makes you wonder, in an especially environment that's unpredictable, and we don't know how this is going to look into next year and beyond, that 7 could actually go down to like a 3, and there could be a lot of movement towards something. But that would be where I would put it, at least right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would be more concerned about the following year and the time that they have to discuss that more.
Okay. Thank you.
I have
Tiffany,
a
did you?
But
Yeah,
could
go
I-
ahead.
I do, but I think Teresa had a question first.
Oh, sure. Either
I
way.
just wanted to clarify that the proposed budget, that column that's beneath the proposed, is that the budget, the printed budget we have from May 19th, or are you referring to a more recent version?
Yes.
That is what it refers to, Teresa. Or the
Okay,
figures that were in
thank
the
you.
printed document. Mhm.
Yep, perfect. Thanks.
So I have a comment and a question. So there's up at the legislature, they're still talking about the long bill, if I understand correctly.
Yes.
And with that, there's still room for individuals, our community, us as a board, to absolutely advocate and lobby for that funding for our schools. When we're looking at a legislature that's looking at giving themselves raises, and we're still trying to figure out we're looking at pay scales for our own teachers, and we've got the legislature looking at pay raises for themselves. I think that advocacy and in contacting our lawmakers is absolutely appropriate before this is decided on, to keep us from to minimize the impact to our own students in our own district. So I would just say, reach out, please reach out. My question is, when we're looking at this 6,481 projected student enrollment, and I know that that's conservative, have we considered the feasibility or the possibility that whatever the state and the county public officials, whatever flexibility we have in the learning in the fall, that there's a possibility that we are going to lose students if we don't have an online program, we're going to lose students. If we don't go to what it looked like last fall, we may lose students. If we do a hybrid, we may lose students. We hear a lot of talk of what does education look like, and obviously each parent has got to be able to have that choice to do what's best for their families and for their students. So does this 6,481 take that into consideration, that there's a possibility we may lose some of our students?
So there's a lot packed into that question, Ms. Upchurch, and it's a great question. I just want to make sure I'm approaching it thoughtfully. The starting point for how that number originated was ahead of all of what we encountered with the pandemic. So it was based on obviously the projections that we received from our updated demographic presentation from a couple of months ago. It was a function of ongoing conversations with principals based on what we know about families who are already committing or at least have expressed that commitment at whatever point in second semester. And it's also 36 fewer students than what we had had on our October 1 count for this last year. So I think I don't want to mislead and say, yes, we've factored that into the 6,481. I think the second part of the answer to that question is everything that you just described in terms of making sure that we are attending to all of the diversity of thought and need that our families are expressing right now in terms of their desire to either have their student in more of an in-person environment, and even families that may be looking at this from an online option. We are trying to and working really hard right now to afford every possible option that's available to our families based on what we can create. So I'm jumping ahead a little bit. This will be a little bit included in the fall planning update, and there's more details to come with this. But as an example, we already have online programming options approved and available starting at our middle school grades through high school. We currently submitted, we just submitted yesterday, Dr. Benton took the lead on submitting an online, fully online program that would be available if approved, which we envision it being approved for any student starting in kindergarten through 6th grade. So what I will tell you is that is our focus right now. Is we acknowledge that there may be some natural movement that occurs over the summer. There is every year. There may be families that are moving. There may be families that are moving in, moving out, moving in. And as we define what more of those fall planning options will look like, our intent comes back to what I said earlier around meeting every student where they are at. So we want to make sure that we are partnering with our families so that we understand exactly what their desires and their needs are. And we will do everything within our power to be adaptable and flexible as a system to accommodate them as such. One other point, and I know this is a long-winded answer, but again, there was a lot to it. There may be, we're not sure quite yet exactly how the October 1 formula is going to set up going into the fall. So there's the possibility, there's a lot of conversation at CDE right now about what does that actually look like? What's guaranteed based on what's in statute, and what's a function of other newer variables that may be introduced as we continue to work through the context of the pandemic. So all of those variables are moving parts. What I would say is I think 6481 is still a fair estimate. We may come in a little bit less, we may come in even a little bit more. So that will be a function of what we need to prepare for as we go into the fall. The last point to that is if we were to see an increase in the PPOR from that base of 7084 that we're talking about right now, that factor, whatever that variable becomes, combined with what that total enrollment amount is, we just need to know that there will be some accounting either way in terms of how that total state revenue allocation will come to us. So I hope that answered all of the questions. There may be some additional follow-up in that, but that's my best description of all those pieces.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you.
Well, can I pack one more item in there?
Of course. If there's one to fit, please do.
Yeah, based on that conversation, I could draw the conclusion that Lewis Palmer School District may never have another snow day again, because if we have snow, we can just everybody hop online.
More or less, yes. I will tell you that I will have members of our leadership team that will smile at that, as will I, in the event that we aren't in a position where we necessarily have to call it in a traditional sense. The mechanisms by which we have that afforded to us by the state, we would still have to submit as a waiver, and there's some technical pieces to all of it. But functionally speaking, yes, to the extent that our system is able to leverage online learning in the event that kids cannot be in school, which is going to be another piece or part of that fall plan. Yes, that applies itself to no matter what the reason is why kids can't be in school. We would envision them having access to instruction via online. That was my way of saying a little bit more refined, Chris, the no snow day. Although, again, that's something that we may be a positive through all this.
Casey, I have a question.
Sure.
Go ahead. I was just going to say thanks.
Thank you.
Sorry to cut you off, Chris. Casey, the reduction adjustment from 1.2 million to 2 million, does that include what we were talking about in our last session in terms of I believe it was a K through 5 literacy deficiency gap program?
So that could cue us. Actually, if we're all good with this slide, we do have a few others to speak to. So if we don't mind, let me build the answer through the next series of slides here, Teresa.
Thanks.
So just a couple things, and from the standpoint of, we know that there's still continuous challenges that we're looking at. This summarizes much of what we just discussed through that first slide. And Vicki, if you can go to the next slide. Okay, there we go. So here's what I'd like to do for the benefit of not only our board, but our public that's tuning in. As you can see, these are the big line amounts that we have identified through multiple conversations, and we use the term scrubs of the budget. I think what's probably most appropriate, just so that you guys have a sense of what each of these line items represent, is to just give every member of our leadership team a moment to speak to what that line represents, the dollar amount, and some of what has been talked about through some of those conversations. So Teresa, to answer that question, I'm going to have Dr. Benton actually take the first line there, because that's representative of a lot of work that was done within learning services. So with that, Dr. Benton.
The curriculum, technology, and professional development resources line item is actually a combination of multiple budgets that learning services and technology services utilize. The professional development costs include cutting the opportunity for teachers to earn pay for a summer learning opportunity that we host. We offer a 2-day teacher-led, teacher-facilitated training every summer, and we would cut that in terms of being able to provide that as an opportunity for staff. We also cut our professional development budget from a district level pretty significantly, including what we call an innovative teacher learning grant that we had offered the last few years, where teachers apply and receive up to $1,000 to be able to attend a training and then bring back innovative practices to their site. We reduced that. We cut that completely, as well as providing professional development to help support different endeavors at each site. So we might partner with a particular school related to their unified improvement plan and offer professional development, since not all school sites have the same depth of funding, depending on what they're trying to do. We also cut basically our normal expenditure for curriculum on an annual basis right now is $462,000. We cut that to $230,000 just for this year, which covers the curriculum that we did put in front of the board as part of that overall purchase between the math, the English language arts, that was a 612 adoption, as well as world history, world geography, and some additional resources there. So we would not be purchasing any new resources for the following year. We also cut an additional $60,000 out of our just general supply budget for purchasing technology, as well as reduced our ability to keep additional parts on hand, as well as some staffing that we've also cut. So with that, I think Bob was going to talk about those staffing adjustments.
Actually, may I ask a question on this before we move off it?
Sure. Yeah, let's do that point by point. Thanks.
So when we as a team cut curriculum, what's the direct impact on the students? And what's the direct impact on the staff? And is it short term? Is it long term? Is it lasting? And can we move forward productively and still generate the environment where the students and staff can flourish? Or are we digging ourselves a hole?
To answer that, we are digging ourselves a hole. Part of what we tried to recover this year was a hole that was dug during the last recession, where we were not putting enough resources into curriculum and training for staff. And it's really challenging because we have a phenomenal staff that can do a lot of things. And so we always joke, here's duct tape and baling wire and they can make learning happen. But the reality is that without relevant tools and current tools, it's really a challenge when we bring in teachers who come from other places who are used to having resources. And instead, they don't. We do dig ourselves a pretty significant hole, especially when we're not adopting and provide, because with that adoption comes current relevant training for staff. And so when you think that our last ELA adoption for secondary was in 2005, that's a 15-year gap that we're now just now being able to fill. So it does put us behind. But again, we have great staff who will take every training possible that they can to learn the new standards, to learn new expectations, but it's not a concerted effort. And we also aren't able to then train new staff who come on board in the same manner. with a curriculum adoption, it's usually a 6-year adoption. That's what we try to aim for now. And so with each year that we kick the can down the road, we are either not able to renew resources that we have, or we have to try and piecemeal them with open source. And sometimes there's great open source resources that are wonderful. And then sometimes we really do need a very comprehensive curriculum to address the standards.
So I'm not quite clear. Thank you very much. I'm not quite clear on the student impact. So if Johnny's in 3rd grade right now, and we make these cuts, what happens to Johnny by the time he gets to 5th grade or 6th grade?
So one of the things that was on the docket for this next year was K-5 literacy. And the hope was to be able to utilize resources, the funding that the sites already set aside for literacy that was put at the sites for the last MLO, and utilize those funds with district resources to basically determine what is the educational impact of research-based, evidence-based materials. Many of the curriculum that we currently use at the elementary level for literacy actually did not make the state's list for research-based, evidence-based curriculum. And so we know we have a gap. And I think I shared that gap at one of the work sessions. We do have an increasing number of students who are performing below or well below grade level K-3. So that long-term impact and is basically the trajectory for each student who's not reading at grade level. Well, when the content gets more challenging, and instead of teaching students to read, they're actually reading to learn, that becomes a huge challenge. So the gap actually magnifies itself in every other content area when a student can't read it.
Is there a tipping point? Is there a point? You understand what I'm asking here? Okay, yeah. So if we don't have this right by 3rd grade, we run a significant risk of losing the kid.
I would say
in terms of being having the life skills he or she might need to be successful.
It's a heavier lift if we can't get them on grade level by 3rd grade. It requires a much greater amount of intervention because, as I said, it starts to magnify itself into a variety of other content areas.
Okay. So why did we choose to cut that if it's so important?
It's basically a conversation. I think that maybe that's something that you all should have. We know that we have some significant budget deficits. And so although we understand, we're still going to do the alignment work. We're still going to talk with staff. We're still going to work on trying to whittle out training opportunities. We'll still apply for every grant that we can, but we also know that that's a sizable adoption request. It's not a cheap adoption by any means. And so we had to make some unfortunate decisions. Or recommendations, I guess.
Okay, thanks.
I think one more point on that I would just echo based off of what Dr. Benton also talked about is this has been more or less current state in our system for as long, well, I've only been here a year, but Dr. Benton, how long has it been this way?
Since 2009.
So it's, I think, just important to mention that there's an element of change management that also comes into this, and whether or not this is something that is an immediate need versus a need that could potentially be addressed the following year or the following year. It's not to say that we don't want to prioritize it, but this is a perfect example of some of the trade-offs based on our proposal.
To help us determine that, and I apologize for going in the weeds, but this is one of those things that's awfully fundamental to our core reason for having a public school system. Yes.
Yes.
Is making sure they can have the life skills to be successful when reading and writing are typically 2 of them, right?
Yes.
It is fundamental.
Okay. What percent of the total population in K through 3 since 3rd grade is the tipping point are below grade level for reading and writing?
Our last metric for the middle of the year, because we weren't able to do end of year testing, was 25%.
Okay, so out of every 4 children in a classroom, one of them is lacking the life skills to move forward and getting towards a tipping point. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Okay. So this is not the right forum, but I would just like to plant the seed for us as a team that's likely not acceptable for our personal values and our community values and what we've committed in terms of providing a quality educational system for the children of our community, whether they're ours or somebody else's, and that we as a team figure out a way to make this happen anyways, because we've got the capacity and the talent and the resources to do it, and that we make it part of our way of life as an entity versus something that we take on or put on or take off the shelf based on fiscal needs.
Ron, I really appreciate your focus on this because I think it is walking the talk, if you will. What I'd suggest, though, is let's go through all these points and then ask the school district admin leadership to then say in reverse priority, which ones would you add back? Because again, we're at worst case right now. So this isn't our final budget approval. And I totally appreciate your focus, so don't misunderstand me. I'm just suggesting that, you know, they've done what they could over the last 3 weeks to find the trade-offs. There's unlimited opportunity, unlimited resources, and that's the unknown still. So if you don't mind, if we could go through all of these and then ask the admin, the superintendent and his team, to then do a priority, reverse priority of which one would you add back first. And then on top of that, because I agree with your focus so much, that maybe they could find something else as a trade-off for that particular issue. Does that sound okay?
Great idea, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. I want to make sure that we loop back to this too. But I agree that going through it, I want to make sure that the momentum is still going. But I had some questions too, so I can respect that, and if we can loop back.
Okay, I think with that said, what we'll do is, Bob, are you on?
Whoop. I'll be coming through Dave's feed here.
Yeah, no problem. Can you speak to the next 2 lines there?
Yes, I can.
Or few lines, I should say.
So what we have done under the staffing, the centralized cuts, it's not just one space, but it is out of central. It's not out of central office. It is out of several departments. What we have done is shift people and move people to open positions and created unfilled positions in several departments: maintenance, grounds, a custodial position, a warehouse position. A variety of positions have gone unfilled. We've also, across both the school-based and centralized positions, in shifting funds around out of certain accounts, we have not filled positions or put less FTE back into a position and thereby created savings in dollars. The school-based accounts, most of that savings comes from, we have a variety of sources. Some of that is natural attrition, as we have hired replacement teachers. They usually come in at less of a cost labor-wise. And then we have not replaced a couple of retirees in 1 or 2 buildings. So that has related in net savings. And as you know, the middle school has reduced some positions as well. So that's where those centralized and school-based cuts come from in staffing. We are not hiring people to replace people, and we are reconfiguring jobs and positions as we go along.
So, Mr. Foster, to clarify, unfilled positions are not equivalent to layoffs, correct?
Correct. We have not laid anyone off. We have just not hired individuals to
Okay.
replace open positions.
And then
we
part
have-
two, oh, go ahead.
And we have moved people into open positions and we will not fill that position. In other words, we moved a custodian into an open position in one of the schools, and we no longer have a custodian assigned to the Grace Best complex. The gentleman here at admin will take care of all of that function now. So a reconfiguration of that job.
Right, reorganization and restructuring.
Yes.
When you say less FTE, that some people have moved to a less FTE position, is that essentially a pay cut for that employee?
No, that employee, as we have replaced employees through attrition, the new employee has less FTE than the old.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Yes.
Bob, you want to go ahead and tackle that supply budget line as well?
Certainly can. Supply budgets and professional services, we have gone through and taken 15% off of all of the school supply budgets. We have also reduced the professional service budgets of the departments. For example, the professional services budget of transportation has been reduced. And what we did there was professional services in those instances are when they have to ship an engine or a transmission or a problem out to a repair shop that we may not have the expertise or manpower to handle. That will be cut back. The same with the departments, maintenance, grounds. Those professional services budgets were trimmed back within the departments within here. The personnel services budget may be trimmed back, was trimmed back a little bit for professional services, which means we will find or try to renegotiate deals with some of the providers to provide for less money. Questions on that?
Okay, I think that takes us to our last line there. So
Rick is here.
Great.
Yeah, we have two line items. We got a reverberation, I'm sorry. We have two line items on exceptional student services, the pooled special ed and the out-of-district placements. We reduced the pooled special education staff and eliminated the out-of-district placement line item. The purpose of these two line items was to allow us some flexibility if we have a student whose needs increase. In public schools, we have an obligation to provide a free and appropriate public education. And if a child's disability requires additional services or additional resources for staffing, we have an obligation to provide those. The ESS pooled special ed staff gave us that flexibility and built those pieces into the budget. We, for this current year, had $120,000 in that line item, and we reduced it down to $25,000. So we still have some cushion if we needed to bring in a paraprofessional or another resource. We haven't cut it completely. And then the out-of-district placement is a line item in which we, if our comprehensive schools can't meet the needs of a child, we would look at an alternative school placement in the Springs area. And that's a line item that we used for that flexibility as well. Our hope is that we're able to maintain the needs of all the students with these reductions. And if in fact we have someone move in or something unexpected occurs, we would have to look for other areas in which to generate those resources. But as of now, we're able to meet the needs of all the kids with these reductions.
So I think that covers at least the comprehensive list. And if I understood the question correctly, Chris, just our take on sort of a reverse prioritization or reprioritization if we were to can you restate it just to make sure I'm accurately responding?
No. So right now we've got the 1.9% increase off the base based on what's in the law. Let's assume for a minute, just for discussion, that it comes in at 2.5% or 3% better than the base. So it's 7,100 or whatever, right? It's higher. So
Sure.
It's going to yield the 1.9%. I think you yield was about 900,000. So if it was 2.9, it would be another 450,000. Now that's given that you're already saying that we need to use 1.5 million in reserves. However, I would like to know before we approve the budget, if I were to look at this list, what's the first thing you would add back? What's the second thing, and so forth. And I say that knowing that these are sacrifices. This isn't like fluff sacrificing here, because we don't know where our revenue or our funding sources are going to amount to. And that's what I'm saying is just how would you, and you don't have to do it right now. It's really for when we go through the budget, the update that we get, how would you prioritize anything that we hopefully by the time we actually see the budget for approval, we'll know the exact PPR number, and then you can just explain how you put things back if you could. And then the last part of it was, again, back to Ron's focus on curriculum. I actually wonder if there isn't something else we could find rather than that, because, you know, as I heard the conversation, that's a hard one for me to agree to cut.
Yeah, and Chris, you were
Maybe
kind of cutting in on out there just a little bit. So just a quick response from the standpoint that do we my interpretation of the question is that something that we think could that 390,000 be found in a different bucket? And what I would say to that is not at first glance. That would take a lot of additional work, and it would inevitably be working into people at that point. And as you can see, that's also represented here based on what we've identified with some staffing efficiencies. What I would say is these are phase one. These represent phase one of what those efficiencies are. So it's definitely possible for us to find additional areas or aspects of our budget to replace the amount that we are currently identifying out of curriculum tech and professional development. But again, that would create a trade-off situation. So that would be something we'd want additional feedback on before making that complete determination. I think the other thing that we are absolutely capable of doing, I would definitely request some opportunity for our team to have more conversation before we just spit out what the order, the rank order would be. We could certainly have that prepared for June 15th. And we may also be in a situation at that time where we know exactly where that final amount is coming in as. And my sense would be anything that's going to have that direct impact to learning, whether it be through the staff that are providing those direct learning services for students, obviously the ones that are closest to the front lines, teachers, paraprofessionals, school-based staff especially, as well as the tools that they need to do the job would be, something that we would want to preserve to the extent that we possibly can.
And I apologize that my voice was breaking up. Hopefully it's better now. But the way you replied is exactly what I was asking for. Is not today, but before we do a final budget, I'd like to know, what you're grappled with between now and then, and hopefully that we could get the curriculum, the trade-offs there if they're possible.
Okay.
But again, that's just my vision of it or my view.
Appreciate that.
So,
Ron, did you have something? I'm sorry. Oh, Tiffany did, and then Ron did.
Let's allow Tiffany to go first.
So when I look at this, I take it back to what I said in the beginning, that when I think of that 80-20 split, and I think of no child left behind, and as we're moving forward, I think each and every child deserves the best we can give them, and that I think this is an example of keeping those cuts as far away from the student in the classroom as possible. So I guess my thought is in agreement with Ron and Chris, that allowing you as the staff to look at wherever and whatever you can find. And I understand and recognize that, you know, tough times call for tough decisions, but at the same time, I would err on the side of not seeing that affect our students. I don't even know how to say it correctly. I apologize but I would concur with Ron and that I want to make sure that we are meeting the needs of our students right where they are. And to me, it seems like if we've got a segment of our students, we're not doing them any justification or our community any justification if we're not absolutely being as attentive as we can to those students that need those whether it's writing or reading, that we're making sure that we are not cutting what we can do for them. And I go back to where in this list is, where does reducing our own school board budget down to almost nearly zero as much as possible fit into this?
It's under the supply and professional service piece of that budget. There are some items that we just cannot completely take away. For example, we have the need for legal review and services. I think you all would agree that at any given point, we need to make sure that we can still contract with counsel when it's appropriate to do so. But there were items, I would say, back to that initial slide, Tiffany, the $585,000 that we were holding on to, that was one example of obviously a move that is pretty low hanging fruit in the event that we know we're not opening a new school next year. But there are other opportunities as well to continue to dig deeper and refine what that total identified amount is, and hence what that reduction represents as a cut away from, or as far away from the classroom as possible. And I think you're making a real, your point was well made. So don't stress that.
I'd like to just add a comment, and then I have a question as well. Chris, I appreciate your thoughts on the curriculum, and I think what you said in terms of having unlimited opportunity, I think we need to keep that sort of at the forefront, listening to the admin team in terms of what they think are the most important opportunities for our kids. So, and I agree with you, Tiffany, as well, that it'd be really helpful, Casey, to have that list by the next meeting, possibly, as to the prioritization from your team as to what we would add back in, especially with regard to curriculum and in the classroom, just purely for the education of the kids on site. I did have a question. I just want to clarify, and perhaps I missed it, but natural attrition aside, is there any plan to lay off any personnel in the district right now for this coming year?
Tiffany, I think, or excuse me, Teresa, I think the best answer to that is we are looking for whatever efficiencies we possibly can find within our current staffing model. So when I hear layoff, one of the places where that can take you is the notion of a reduction in force of our teaching staff. There is no plan for a reduction in force for our teaching staff as we go into next school year. Where there may be efficiencies that we can identify in terms of either redundancies in position or areas where there's just not the same need identified for staffing. If I can here, I think it's important to be transparent about that. Middle school is an example of a reduction in staffing as a function of a reduction in enrollment. So when you go from 865 students down to about 805 for next year, naturally that is going to have a reduction in how we allocate a staffing model that's consistent with the needs of a drop in student population. So I don't want to make this a matter of semantics. There were hires that we were prepared to make and even had offered a few positions, which we were making an assumption earlier in the spring that we would be able to maintain that staffing allocation. And since that time, we've had to make a modification to that staffing allocation. So there may be some that say, well, that's a layoff. You're laying people off. Well, technically it wasn't laying off anyone that was in a job, but if it was a position that we were going to hire for and then didn't hire for it, that certainly has an impact to both the community as well as to the individual that we may be interviewing or working with. So I hope that answers your question. It's not a reduction per se, but it is a staffing allocation model that's consistent with what we're identifying as the needs of a particular building in this case.
Oops, I was muted. In that reallocation, would you say, I mean, is that putting a larger workload on those remaining?
Well, that opens up a conversation that I know the middle school is actually in the process of having as a result of that shift. What you have to look at that point is, based on what you do have, how might we create efficiencies in a model? And I can tell you that that's something that the administration at Lewis Palmer Middle School and its teachers are talking about right now, is where they can find those efficiencies. The reality is there's actually, depending on how you look at it, class size as an example, it actually will yield a lower class size for their school based on a rescheduling or a different type of scheduling approach to how they work with teacher assignments, et cetera. So without going into all those elements and specifics, the workload actually can be more efficient in terms of how that is all designed and implemented. So in this particular case, based on how they are remodeling, it will not, this is my 2 cents on it. You can talk to other people about their take, and there's different opinions about it. But I will tell you that it will reduce the class sizes. So it'll actually go from about an average of 30 to an average of less than 25 across the school. And our intent is to make sure that teachers are supported in their effort to focus on there's really just 2 main responsibilities that they have, which is creating strong connections with their kids and really high quality instruction. So we believe that their job is can be supported. Teachers' jobs are, as we know, very difficult no matter how you look at them, but I don't think it necessarily warrants an increase in workload just because of a different model of how we're approaching both the staffing allocation and then the distribution of assignments within that specific school site. And I feel like I'm doing a lot of what Sean O'Connor would be able to talk about, but that's a conversation we've had over the past few days in a lot of detail relating to a shift that quite honestly represents about half of what that school-based, or a little bit more, I think, of what that school-based line represents. The other positions that you're looking at there are what Bob alluded to earlier, which are reclassifications, other efficiencies that have been found, but again, not reflecting a layoff in a traditional sense of the word. So I hope, again, that answers that question, Teresa.
Yeah, thanks. That's helpful. I just had one follow-up question as well for Mr. Frampton, if he's still on.
I'm still here, yes.
Oh, great. So your reduction sounds really significant, down to $25,000. And I know we're talking about worst case scenario, but I would be interested to hear, on your list, what you would add back, knowing that we have a significant special ed population in our district who's served so well by the educators here, and not knowing necessarily what new special ed students we might have in the fall or this coming year. $25,000 doesn't sound like a lot to accommodate new or incoming special ed students. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. The first piece I'd like to speak to is I'd like to go back up to the line Lori talked about, is many of the students, that 25% number that Lori quoted, are also impacting students with disabilities. So if we can look at the literacy and the professional development and curriculum resources, that would be a way to address many of our students with disabilities. So I would still prioritize where Lori was coming from in the first bullet. In the second bullet, obviously, if students move in and we need to seek more money, we're going to have to identify where that's going to come from. And that would involve a conversation in the future. Because of our FAPE obligation, we have an obligation to provide those level of services and supports. We're just cutting that to we're just going to be really lean, knowing that if in fact we cross that threshold of $25,000, we're going to have to look into other places for that money because our obligation isn't going to change. So in prior years, we've just had more room and more flexibility, and it was a little bit more comfortable. I think we'll still be able to meet all of those needs with the existing number, but if an unexpected population of kids moves in, we're going to have to reapproach this and look in other areas. That's all.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Anything else on this specific slide? Yeah, please, Ron.
I just had one small add-on to Chris's comment. As the team builds the list of what if we have the opportunity, what comes back first. Obviously, we need to have an amount. But the other question I would have is sometimes it's possible to move things from ongoing recurring expense to 1 or 2 time capital expense. And that makes it sometimes a lot more palatable, or it's certainly a different way to absorb an expense. And so as you build that list, is it possible to look at the opportunity to do that? And in some cases, it's not possible, but in other cases, I just want to make sure we exercise not just should we do it, but how should we do it?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Could I add just one thought to what Teresa was talking about? And that is, as I understand it, the worst case budget that we looked at last time, these are cuts that you've found in the budget, but we've also, you've proposed a budget that freezes all salaries across the board. And that's not quantified here, but it is a reality of this budget, correct?
Yes, it is. Chris, did I lose you? Okay, great. So we did have.
Are there any other before we? Sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Clausen.
Go ahead, Casey.
We just had a couple other slides still as part of this presentation. I know it's still going here, but I think we can do these fairly quickly. Dave, you still on?
Yep.
You just want to speak to this real quick?
Are you off, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so in this slide, we have our just kind of some clarification of how we're utilizing our reserves. The difference, we use fund balance and reserves kind of interchangeable in the terms, but a clearer definition you can see here is what is a fund balance, and it's the net worth of the fund at any given time by calculating the assets minus the liability. So that creates basically that represents that 12.5, 12.7, 11.5 number, whatever we land on after we get done with our expenditures in our budget. That'll be our ending fund balance. Cash reserves, the only difference really with cash reserves and the fund balance is that we take into account liability. So on top of the, let's say $12.1 million we have in reserves, we tack on maybe a $4 to a $4.5 million amount, which is there for paying salaries and benefits for that month. So that's a continued amount of money. So that's on top of the fund balance. Does that make sense? Our cash balances are around, like I said there, the 17 million with the 4.5 of it of being liability, which is our salaries and benefits. What else? The purpose of the reserves is to address unexpected contingencies, support cash flow, and are used for one-time expenditures. Because we know that if we are dipping into our reserves and we're putting it towards things that are sustainable, like salaries and benefits, how do you get that money back unless there's a change in revenue or unless we make some reductions at our district that will never get built back up. So one-time expenditures and the protection of our, if there are times when the state can't give us or we're at a low point in our funds, we are able to utilize our reserves to help us offset that and have the ability to continue to pay without any hesitation on that. So that's just a continual flow of funding there. Our estimated beginning fund balance, again, is at, we started to build our budget based on a $12.7 million amount. As we end this fiscal year, we will have that trued up a little bit more, but that's how we based our budget. And we continue to keep it at that point for our final budget. The estimated ending fund balance with the anticipated change in revenue, that's what we're coming out at right now is 11.2 number. That could also change if we have some obviously changes from the state on where our PPOR will land. And the balance, so that's where we come up with what we need to dip into reserves this year in order to balance our budget. We would need that $1.5 million. And as we've spent the last hour talking about, that is a moving target right now. Are there any questions?
So I have a couple questions on this, and specifically on the third bullet. And I believe that $4.5 million is the 4.87 and change that, or 4.47 and change that Kevin was speaking about at our last session. Is that what that dollar amount is?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and, Ron. That's the liability.
Okay, and then the 12.7 basically is 17 minus 4.5. Is that where that number comes from?
Can you repeat that, Ron?
The difference from the 17 to the 12.7.
Yes. Sorry, we're having some technical issues.
Dave, I don't think that's completely accurate. Ron, that 12.7 is what is represented in our general fund 10 fund balance. So it's not inclusive of other fund balances that we see, whether they be cap reserve, other funds that we run. Dave, I want to make sure you heard that correctly.
Yeah, sorry, I was getting some.
Are the cap reserves in the 17?
Cap. Let me reference something. Dave, you understand what he was referring to?
Yeah, Ron, can you repeat it again? I had some technical difficulties. Now I can hear better.
Sure. Here's what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah.
How much money do we have that we don't need to run the district on a ongoing, recurring basis, and for things that we've set aside money for, like major repairs and real estate purchases, etc.? Is that 17 million or 12.7 million?
So, Ron, the fund that you're referencing, the capital amount, the building fund, is on top of the 17 million. The 4.5 of liability is included in the salaries. That's the salaries and benefit amount that is included in the 17 million. The other dollar amount, which is about a 2.96 million amount, sits in another account, and that was revenue coming in from the sale of land and also from a settlement with
right.
Yeah, those are the two.
Right.
That is on top of it.
Right. And so, and some of that money is designated for special purpose per a board resolution a couple of years ago as well. Yeah.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
But above and beyond that, the only question I have then is the 4.5 million that's a component of the net 17.
Yes.
Do we have to show it as a liability because of generally accepted accounting principles? Or do we have to show that as a liability because that money really is already designated for something and it's not available for other use?
Yeah, I would say both. I mean, it's a general accounting piece to audit, but it is committed. It is, for lack of, I'm not going to, yeah, it is committed.
Okay. Do we get funds on a reoccurring basis to replenish that 4.5 million?
We do. We receive our state funding monthly, as well as sometimes we'll receive a little bit larger amounts based on when taxes come in.
Okay.
We do receive a certain amount of money every month.
So Dave, is it fair to also identify that trust and agency fund at 2.1 million as part of a more flexible reserve allowance? Both the building reserve fund, which we do have some commitments to, that 2.5, and that trust and agency fund at 2.1 are representative of beyond our general fund 12.7, 12.8 amount. Those are two other funds that make up part of what we're talking about as available reserves.
Yeah, that's above and beyond the 17 million. The building reserves, there are some restrictions on how to spend that, so that can't just be transferred back into the general fund or Fund 10. The trust and agency amounts are also part of that Fund 74 and 75.
Okay. I guess what I'm still struggling with, and I think several fellow board members in one-on-one conversations are struggling with, and the community is struggling with, is what's the net worth of the district in terms of cash that we don't need to run the business on a reoccurring and daily basis, and in terms of cash that is in excess of the $6 or $6.5 million that the board resolved to put away for a rainy day or for cash flow purposes in the event we need to provide a short-term swing loan to the district to cover things like payroll.
Well, let me ask this. It might be helpful because I think what you want to see is what's in the audited financial from last year. That we can define what those reserve balances are. Every year, the board is asked to allow the district to borrow against the general reserve to pay for some funding of construction in progress, et cetera, for the summer. So I think the information is available. I think we just need to have you put your finger on it. It'll answer these questions that you're asking.
So I'm pulling up the schedule of investments, which represent all of our different accounts, including governmental accounts, bond redemption account, building fund accounts, trust and agency funds, cash on hand. It's a running total that represents fluctuations month to month. We started last July 2019 with that total investment amount at 27 million. As it is currently showing end of April, we do not have end of May currently uploaded. It's 23 million in total investments. Now that doesn't necessarily give you the bottom line, what's available in reserve. There's some different ways of looking at that based on what each of those accounts represent. But to answer your bottom line question right now, Ron, that is the total investment that we currently have available to us month to month in our district. And the lowest that amount went was in February, just around 15 million. And the reason I think it went down is because those are us paying bills, and then we got an additional investment from the state. Is that correct, Dave? Went from 14 million to 24 million. Or excuse me, 14.8 to 24.8. So there was an additional $10 million that comes into our accounts as of March 2020. So I think, Ron, what makes it hard to just bottom line it as one singular number is there's so many different layers to each of these different accounts. But that total investment demonstrates what that dollar amount essentially is.
That would
So I
include
guess we're-
debt service, right? I mean, that's,
Yes.
so that's a pretty composite number of lots of funds. I
Yes.
think some focus on the funds, understanding their purpose, what the restrictions are, et cetera, because I think what David's been sharing with us is the general fund, the
Correct.
general
Yes.
reserve, and these others, you know, I'm glad to talk about them. The information exists though, so I think it's a different presentation or a different discussion.
It is. I
Right.
just want to.
And
I don't want it
waylay
to.
the meeting.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Where I want to get to is, how much do we need to run the business? How much do we need to set aside in case there's something that's uninsured that creates a major expense at a facility or a lawsuit or something like that? And how much is left that we can leverage to generate the highest quality education and impact on our students and our staff? Because nobody wants to sit on an asset that's not working for us, right? I'm not advocating I'm not advocating getting rid of reserves. All I'm saying is, what's a smart, conservative, prudent number to run the business, to have in our pocket, and what's left, if anything, and if it's left, how are we leveraging it to help our kids and staff be successful and become quality members of the community in our country?
I'm assuming right now, Ron, you just want that to sit, not a response, because I would just be throwing out dollar amounts. That's, you know.
I
don't think that's a fair way to do it.
At the end of the day, if all the data is available, we should be able to get to a number, and then we have yet another tool to use to be successful in our strategic plan.
Yes, and I would just add that depending on the approach or the assumptions that we're making, those numbers could fluctuate. Just right. It's going to be a scenario-based type of an answer for you. So I think as it stands today, this is what we have identified as the 12.7 out of general fund balance that's available to help us balance the budget for this next year at about a $1.5 million amount.
Thanks.
Yeah, and Ron, I would just add that your last statement there about how does it fit within the strategic plan is the point. So there are assets in the district, and how do we best utilize them in the strategic plan? I think what the district is presenting to us now is not, you know, a subset of that strategic plan. We're trying to do that, but in reality, we're just coming out of a survival, and now we're trying to figure out how we continue to survive into next year. Your questions are really good, and I think as we build out the strategic plan that looks forward, I think it'll all come together for you.
I think that was an excellent point, Chris. So real quick, Vicki,
Thanks,
can you go to the
Chris.
next? And thank you both. Okay, Vicki, I think you went by one slide too. Okay. Something else that I know was asked of us is to look at the potential of fee increases as early as next year. As we have done some initial research in each of these areas, what we can tell you is that based on our current fee structure model, we at least, summarizing this, believe that we would need time to propose a better fee structure that would be one that is accounting for all of the different services that our families are currently receiving. And we just believe that to thrust that upon the community at this late stage of the game in preparation for an August return is really disadvantageous from a number of perspectives. So our belief at this point is that we would engage in deeper work around each of these potential fee amounts and increases that we could identify, and would request that we would have more time to do so before setting a dollar amount to each of these different categories. I'm going to go through this a couple more slides just so we can get through the whole presentation and then come back to any questions. One of the things that we have been really wanting to make sure that we are doing effectively is providing an avenue for community input. So as our proposed budget is currently available for review, May 18th through June 15th, there was the DAC presentation that Ms. Upchurch mentioned earlier, and obviously the formal public hearing that will be available on June 15th. What I would add is that last line in regards to staff and community survey, we were looking for some additional guidance from our board in terms of the timing and potential scope of the survey. And in the event that we leverage this survey between now and June 15th, actually we would envision it going out sooner and having the results available so that we could present those at June 15th. But just being really transparent about that, one of the fundamental things that I know has been talked about is the potential for, pardon me, either pay reductions through the form of furlough days or just a set salary reduction and or layoffs. And one of the things, as you can see through this update, is that that does not appear to be a direction that we have to go in, which means we've been hesitant to throw a survey out there to our staff or stakeholders that say, what do you think about a pay reduction in the event that we're not really entertaining that for at least this next budget cycle. So that is a question that we would request some feedback on from our board in terms of what more would we want to hear from our community in an effort to make sure that it is a survey that is not just hypothetical, but one that is actionable. And then the last slide, and then I'll just revisit that question, is that our timeline, as you know, is been a short one and one that we still feel capable of presenting a finalized budget to you all for your final review and approval by the June 15th regular meeting, which we currently have scheduled. So recognizing that that was a lot of information and a lot that we covered, the one question I did have in regards to that staff community survey I want to touch on, and then any other final questions or comments for y'all.
Casey, with regard to the survey, could you put in some questions regarding the fees now so we could start gathering some data on that, even if we don't use it this coming year?
We absolutely could, yes.
Okay, I think that would be helpful to me as one board member. I'm glad to help formulate those if you need help with that.
I think we'll take you up on that. It'd be great to have a extra set of eyes on that before we finalize and send out.
Can we make sure that when we're doing this survey that these are, we're not looking at doing fees this year, but we're asking questions for future of what we're looking at moving forward if this extends beyond this year. And I ask that because I just want to make sure that we're being aware that when we put this out there, that there's not the opportunity for folks to jump to conclusions and think that this is what we're doing and how we're doing it this year in such a short time frame as far as fees go.
I think your point is well stated, both from that perspective, Ms. Upchurch, as well as just that's been one of our hesitations in just throwing out a survey just in a rush to get feedback. We wanted to make it as, again, actionable and as relevant as possible, less hypothetical, more, hey, we have a difficult choice between A or B option, and what feedback can you provide at that point for us? So again, appreciate that point.
Well, I think it would also be helpful too, when we're doing that, who knows what other ideas our community or our staff or even our students might come up with that we haven't thought about. So having an open-ended question, I think would be important too.
Sure. Other thoughts on that?
I have a question. It's not necessarily survey directed, but while we're going through this And again, since we are still at the mercy of the unknowns, is it possible for us to pass this, but when we're voting on this budget at the June 15th meeting, and we're having public hearings for the June 15th meeting, to revisit this midway through the school year if we need to make adjustments? Say,
absolutely. Yeah, that will be fundamental to whatever we finalize. Is we will have to be monitoring this as early as we return in August into September. I would go so far as to say probably a monthly update. I don't know that it would necessarily be a request for adjustments every month, but we have by policy through end of January 2021 to approve any adjustments to the budget as a function of what we learn as we come into next year, and continue to work with updates that will come through October 1 count and other variables as well. So yes, this will require us being flexible and agile as we keep going.
And then I have one more question, and I don't know if you have the answer to this yet. There had, prior to the spring semester, there had been ideas pushed around out there in Denver and throughout the school district community of having 2 count dates, an October count date and possibly a February count date. Do you know if there's been any movement with that, or if that's discussion has been tabled?
All I can tell you on that is that we have not received any definitive information from CDE as to a change in how we're approaching the October 1 count formula, but there are definitely conversations and speculations just without any finality to that at this point.
I haven't seen any bills, have you?
No.
No.
Okay, anything else? Keeping in mind, we've got another couple of topics here, so. Mr. Clausen,
why don't we go ahead and move on?
Okay. All right. So what I'd like to do is, in an effort to keep this as focused as possible, as we shift our focus into our fall planning update, I'd like to just give you an opportunity to be refreshed on the survey data that was completed a couple weeks back through our Thought Exchange platform, and to help process through that data with us and just give you a high-level overview of what the responses were from our community. I'm going to have Ms. Julie Steffen walk us through the Thought Exchange platform and point out a few things.
Hi guys, I'm going to share my screen. Are you seeing the Lewis Palmer School District website?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. What I want you to notice is up here on the URL, it's lewispalmer.org/thought exchange. If you want to look at this later, which I hope you do, this is an easy way for you to get to the link that's been provided for you. You can do it with that easy URL. You could also look up Thought Exchange in our search right here. It will bring you to this page. You can click on it, and this is what we're talking about. This is the overview, the summary of the Thought Exchange we did earlier in May. You can see we had really good participation, really good thoughts, lots of ratings. I think it's key to hit the show more because you want to see who it is who's participated. By far, it was parents and guardians who participated the most. We're extremely pleased, though, that almost 20% of our respondents were students. Kind of key to know with going back to school that the people who it affects the most, other than staff, responded so strongly. To get an overview of what was said, you can hit the top thought buttons and hit view. And these are the thoughts that were rated the highest. What I really value about this is that of these, they're all talking, most of them, the top ones are talking about teachers. Across the board, predominantly teachers were praised. So that was the support we heard of the good job they were doing, pivoting on the fly in March and producing ways to connect that they'd never done before. Our constituents really valued that. One of the other key items that you can see is in the themes. And key thing you'll want to notice is over here in the top right corner, you're looking at how people ranked it or the number of comments about it. What it tells me by looking at this, all of these have rankings of about 3, is that people have a lot of concerns. But you can click on any of these and get to the specific thoughts. What I think is interesting is the number, though, that more people talked or used the word in person than ranked it. So you're going to see ranking that it's just one of many. But when you look at the number, this was talked about extensively. So something to know when something is talked about, it's not pro or con, it could be either. So you can go through and see all sorts of, some people are concerned, a lot really, really want to get back. I thought it was also interesting that remote learning, people felt equally strong about that being a choice. And that was mentioned in the remote learning and in the hybrid. So we have really good data that people want to be able to choose. I thought you guys especially might want to look at some of the suggestions. One of the things that people had a problem with was that they didn't like that grades didn't matter at the end of the semester. They didn't like that there were inconsistencies on LMSs that were used. Some things that are interesting to check out there. In the concerns, I thought it was interesting too. Should they wear a mask? Should they not wear a mask? But lots of good conversation about those sort of things. So I invite you to check that out. Do you have any questions about accessing the info you want in this? Oh, one more thing. I want you to be able to know you can also look for a topic in here if you like this vehicle better. For instance, the concern. And it'll show you them that way.
What was the date of this survey? When was it open?
It was open for about 8 days in the middle of May.
Relatively recently then.
Yes, sir, before school was out.
And how do we publicize this thought exchange survey?
Sure. It is in announcements on our website. I sent it to all staff and we sent it a couple of times in our Parent Friday updates. So they have the direct link to this data, which brings them to this page.
Casey or Julie, can someone refresh my memory? How many families are in our district?
Just a moment. Okay.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I was
Siri
wondering if
I
thought Siri was going to answer.
I wish.
So within just D38 students, only students that are attending our neighborhood schools, we have about 5,400 Off the top of my head, I believe that represents close to 4,000 or so families. Is that about accurate, Julie? I'm probably off by a little bit there.
I've looked for this number many times and it's complicated because of multiple households and all that stuff. But I think 4,000, 4,500 is a fair, because a lot of people represent, there's 2 households represented or there's just 1 child. 4,000 is a good ballpark.
Okay, thank you.
So I think the other element that's worth noting here, and as I find a way for us to maneuver from the data that was just shared with you, which I think is really important for us to continue to reconnect to and reflect upon, it also is further embodied. As the board knows, there are multiple statements or messages that are coming our way right now that further reflect, I think, a lot of these same desires. I know many folks in our community are anxious for answers, as many specifics and details as we can provide. So with all of that in mind, and this might be a good opportunity, Julie, if we can get back to Vicky's screen. And Vicky, I'm going to have you bring up the 2-page document that's built into this agenda item. It's the school reopening working group participants. So I just want to say a few words. I'm not going to go through a specific presentation here, but I'm going to summarize a few things. As you know, we are one of 6 districts in the Pikes Peak region that has elected to join a regional consortium working group that will be supported by the District Management Group, or DMG for short. We believe that the expertise and the organizational capacity that is provided through DMG, as well as the opportunity to strengthen and enhance collaboration with other districts in our community, really positions us both strategically and responsively to the fact that this is as difficult or as challenging of a situation in terms of preparing for reopening schools this fall as we've ever encountered. And with that in mind, we recognize that there will be endless debate about what the preferences are or what the agreements or disagreements about the plan will be. It's fair to say that the plan, whatever it becomes, will be highly scrutinized. It will need to be not only validated and vetted by a variety of our staff and parent stakeholders, but it will also need to stand up to the expectations that are being thrust upon us at both a local, state, and even a national level. And so that's one of the difficulties, I think, in helping our community understand that there are certain things that are within our control and certain things that are beyond our direct control. I know increasingly we are hearing from a number of constituents saying, just go back as normal. And while there's an appreciation for how that return to normalcy will support our students, as well as a sense of how we're working through this, the one thing that I think is going to be important for us to remind ourselves is, regardless of an individual perspective on the issue, this is a public health crisis. And within that challenge, there are certain dimensions to how we are having to respond to those public health expectations that we will just have to do the best we can right now to anticipate what different scenarios of a return to normal does look like. Again, keeping in mind that this is still early June and that a lot can continue to evolve and to shift as we go from June into July, and then obviously preparing for August. That being said, this will be a monumental lift for our team in regards to how we develop the details and specifics of these plans. So what the DMG is doing in supporting that work with other districts alongside is we are formulating 4 different working groups and a steering committee. And so what you see represented on this 2-page document, without going through line by line, is the recommendations from DMG about working group participants. So real quick, Vicki, if you can just keep it up. Well, keep it up back on the other one. I was just going to see if you can go in a little bit more just to blow it up. If not, that's okay. But we have an operations group, which represents a lot of the work that happens within facilities, maintenance, transportation, food services, technology, health, safety, security, et cetera. We are going to add also through each of these groups a principal representative from one of our buildings, as well as a Monument Academy representative, so that we are affording the charter within our district the opportunity to be part of this partnership and collaboration as well. Again, this is an opportunity for us to work extremely collaboratively around how we develop this. That looks great, Vicki. Thanks for bringing that up a little bit. There's a stakeholder working group. As you can see, some of the roles we don't necessarily completely demonstrate in alignment to what other districts have, but you can see this is a lot around planning and coordination from a communications perspective, human resources, again, principal reps. And then this is also an opportunity to really leverage various stakeholder voices, including different parent representatives, student representation, our Lewis Palmer Educational Association representation, and then an opportunity as well for board representation, which I'll speak more about here in just a moment. And then if you go to that next page there, great, thanks, Vicki. We know that we'll have to spend quite a bit of time thinking about instructional core, really everything that is embodied within the relationship between students, our teachers, and our curriculum and our methodology of curriculum and instructional delivery, as well as the social emotional learning dimensions that are going to be extremely important. So you can see a variety of roles that are represented within this working group. And lastly, our resource working group, which will spend a lot of time looking at resource allocation, where we situate with our budget, as well as different cost drivers that will need to be examined closely as we're working to develop multiple scenarios in preparation for that return. Vicki, if you just briefly go back up then to the top of the first page, all four of these working groups are going to again, have a variety of representation from within our system. And then we also are going to have what is referred to as the steering committee, which will be the group that will have the opportunity to look very closely at what the different solutions and plans are that are being developed by the working groups in order to assess for both coherence in the plan, as well as issues of equity that are being addressed. So here we're really looking at a group that will leverage all of the collective expertise and work to ultimately review and make determinations or decision points that will be presented as we continue to go forward. Keeping in mind that through all of this, again, we want to use and leverage the strategic plan framework as part of the context and guidelines that we're working within. I think this is actually a real exciting opportunity from the standpoint that while our focus will be primarily on fall planning, we'll also be having a lot of conversations about our future vision and what we want to prioritize as some of the milestones that will be represented within each of our goal categories. And then obviously sharing this and looking for community input into what we draft and what we're developing with opportunities for continuous revision as we go. I don't want to go through the entire slideshow that was presented by DMG, but what I'm excited to share with you is that this Thursday from 12 to 2, we will actually be launching our work with our counterparts across the various Pikes Peak districts and DMG, and that will be an invitation that will go out to all of the individuals who we're actually close to finalizing who those individuals are for each of our working groups here in the next day. And then I will share that information with our board. And as we continue to communicate with the community, we'll let people know what those updates are, what's involved as we're rolling that out. And then again, opportunities for continuous feedback and refinement. With that in mind, I did want to, if we could just take a quick moment, Mr. Clausen, just to see from our current board, I don't believe that every board member necessarily needs to feel obligated to serve, but anyone that is interested in serving in any of these working groups, as well as being a member, I'd like one board member at least to be a member of the steering committee. It'd be nice to have that, if we can, solidified today so that we can ensure that we are accurately looping you all in and making sure that you have a read into how all of this is taking place. And I'm happy to answer any other questions that you may have as well.
Casey, what do you anticipate the time commitment being and the overall timeline for this?
Yeah, that is actually the question that we've had not as concrete of an answer for as what we would have preferred. And part of that is because we're still building this out and DMG is working with us closely. I think in general, what we just had a meeting with them yesterday, we're anticipating each working group meeting 1 to 2 times per week for like a 2-hour chunk of time, keeping in mind that the real focus of these working groups is a lot of work. It's a lot of detail. It's a lot of getting into the specifics and really building all of that out. And then that working group would then be engaged in a weekly regional cohort group that would meet at some point during the week. So it's probably going to be 2 to 3 times per week per working group for at least the first few weeks. I'm anticipating that being more heavy in June, with an understanding that ideally we're on a tight timeline and we'd like to have as developed of a plan as we can possibly produce by early to mid-July, that we're in a position where we can say with a pretty strong degree of certainty, here's how everything is lining up for August. The sooner we're able to do that, I know the better, but we also don't want to rush it and get it wrong. So the other group in that, Teresa, is the steering committee, and that group would likely meet on a week-to-week basis with a regional network meeting for that steering committee every other week. So we're still working through those details of logistics, and ideally by Thursday or no later than Friday, we have a grid that we can have that schedule built in as we go. I will say one more thing on that. As much as we understand that summer has its challenges as far as different schedules, commitments, people have breaks or vacations that they may have scheduled, et cetera, we're going to work around that as flexibly as we can. We don't want somebody to feel like just because they might not be able to make every single meeting that they may not be able to serve completely on the team. At the same time, we do need to have some predictability and some consistency within those groups. So that's kind of that long-winded answer to, we should know exactly what all those details are by this Thursday going into Friday.
Casey, is there an opportunity for more than one board member to be involved?
I think so. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know I would like to be involved in this, but I'm sure that a lot of us would like to be involved in this.
Yeah, I guess that was my starting point. I mean, we could go as far as having one of you on every work group, but I don't want to put that burden out there unless that's where we're at. I think if we were to divide this, into the 5 groups that it is, we'd have one for the steering committee, and either 1 to 2 per the other groups that are there. So there may be some naturally, some affinity grouping, if you will, based on how the different groups are playing out. And we can sort of sort that out as best we can right now, if you'd like.
How are we getting the word out? So when I look at those different work groups and I see, for example, with parents, we're looking at the PTA reps, which in our case is the PTO reps. How are we engaging families who may not be in their PTO meetings for scheduling conflicts or what have you or whatnot, but are absolutely impassioned to be a part of this dialogue? How are we getting that?
Tiffany, I appreciate that question. Here's the best way for me to answer that. I asked principals to just tell me who they think would be the best representatives. When I say best, like people that they know have the ability to really do the work and see the big picture and get everything done. We are not in a position, I just want to be really clear, we do not have the time nor the ability to put this out to the entire community and say, whoever is interested, please let us know. And then there's an application process and all the other things to that. We just have to kind of go with what we know about who our people are. And if there's somebody with a passionate interest, I think that's already been to some extent expressed through different principals. So I can tell you that we have a pretty robust list of parents right now. What I would add as a layer beyond that is even if you aren't in a position where you can serve technically on the working group, it doesn't mean that we're not going to have opportunities for additional feedback from whoever in the community would like to provide that. But we're just, these groups are not like so pliable and mendable that we can just, put this whole big process together to identify, every person that may want to have their say into that work group. So I just want to be transparent about that. And that may not be the end all preference. I will say this, there will be, as we work through the stakeholder groups, an opportunity for even more concrete feedback loops at each school site. So I do envision, to some extent, every parent who again wants their voice to be part of this, we will make sure that we have all those ideas and all those thoughts represented as we continue to go.
Thanks. That's good, because that was my concern, is making sure that everybody feels like they have a voice at the table. And I can appreciate the steering committee and the short time frame, but I just wanted to make sure that we were being mindful of folks that want to have their voice or their thoughts or their ideas heard, and the students as well.
Yes, and what I can say to that is, I think we have as I mentioned, we have a pretty robust starting point list of parents that we have initially identified. The focus of these working groups, I just need to be really clear, is going to be a lot of getting the work done. This is not really, the vehicle of the working group is not to hear every opinion or every idea. It's about taking the shells of everything that we're working with and building the details and specificity behind that. So it's at some point going to have to be more than just, well, I feel this way about something. It's like, this is how we have to actually develop a plan to be able to make it work. And then the opportunity for feedback around that is going to be built in behind and around that. So I just want to be clear about that I think we have a pretty good sense right now of what are all the different opinions and ideas and feelings that are out there. To take that and actually translate that to here are the actions that we're going to take is going to be a big part of this work that's occurring within each working group. But all that to say, Tiffany, I hear you saying you definitely want to be a part of at least one of the groups.
Yeah, I would like to be personally.
Okay.
And I absolutely appreciate that. Is that I'm sure that there's some resources we can give folks that really want to feel that have that need to advocate, to recognize that maybe, I don't know how to communicate it, but that they should be also advocating at the county level and at the state level, and advocating at the Colorado Board of Education level, that a lot of this, when we're talking about a public health issue, is a lot different than, say, a curriculum issue. And so I think it's important that I hear the voices of people want to be heard. There's a passion, education, everybody's passionate about our own kids and our education. So I just, giving people an avenue to be able to advocate, I think, is important in this dialogue moving forward. And knowing how much flexibility we as a district have, and how much, what can we do? It's like, let me give you an example. As a parent, I look at, let's say the state said masks for students. Denver's public school district said that students will wear masks. My personal opinion is that would be a terrible idea in our school district. Part of the purpose of masks is if kids are fidgeting and touching, I just don't see that as being ideal. So how does a parent like me, or a parent like a next door neighbor or a board member, where else can we advocate those perspectives?
Sure. What I hear you saying is really making sure that we have channels for that advocacy that are best directed toward, beyond what parents may want to see us do in the district. There are other organizations that also can be looped into that advocacy. And you're bringing up a great example, Tiffany, in the sense of that would be work of the working group to talk through all the different possibilities and scenarios that exist. So then what becomes our bottom line as we make a determination for where we are going within District 38. So that obviously would require a lot of investment of not just from a mask standpoint, but in everything that falls under a health and safety category. And that would be an example of something that actually would live more in the operations working group, which frees other working groups up to say, okay, they're not going to spend time talking about all that, but the job of the steering committee then is to say, here are how all these plans are intersecting and relating right now. So are we in a position where we can make sure that there's the coherence and the equity that we need to afford across the entire system? Is there any other board interest in serving right now? I just wanted to get kind of an initial starting point.
Casey, I'd be glad to volunteer. I think my strengths would lie either in steering committee operations or instructional core.
Okay, I appreciate that. Tiffany, do you want to weigh in real quick on your preferences?
Well, I was looking at steering, and I was also looking at stakeholders and resources.
Okay. Any other interest in that? Chris, Ron, or Matt? Just want to make sure I give you a chance before we work toward finalizing. Okay, I see your chat there, Chris. Thank you. Okay, very good. I will reach back out to you then individually and make sure that you're looped into the Thursday launch session and have an opportunity once our schedules are solidified to be able to confirm that commitment. So thank you for sharing that. And then any other questions, just big picture related to the fall planning work as it currently presents?
I do have two more big picture questions. With the DMZ group and working with the consortium, how are we ensuring that they are recognizing that each of us as individual school districts have our own strengths and challenges? D38 certainly is different than D2. So making sure that as we're moving forward in the Pikes Peak region, that we're moving together as a consortium, but also recognizing that we each have our own individual personalities of our school districts.
Sure. Yeah, I alluded, I think, earlier in my description to a meeting that we had with them yesterday. That was one of the different questions that we had the opportunity to respond to them with. So this was our district leadership team that was meeting with them. And so there's an appreciation and an understanding that every district is unique. So that was essentially what we were able to speak to, is some of our unique contexts and how this is a locally driven decision-making group that is working as part of a bigger consortium and network. So I see them as not something that are mutually exclusive at all. I think it's mutually reinforcing. They are very experienced at working with a variety of school districts across the nation. They are not the ones that are making the decisions for us. We are the ones that are deciding what is going to be best for us. We are just using their expertise, their resources, their ability to leverage research and a variety of other tools at our disposal. So I think while on the surface, it's one thing to say, well, what is this group actually doing that we can't do ourselves? What they're actually doing is providing a structure and a framework that helps from a high level down to a detailed perspective. But we are the drivers of this plan. And so I know there are some different schools of thought. Is this even a necessary resource? And what I will tell you is that through other conversations with other districts, there is a real bandwidth issue that we experience as a function related to just planning the plan to figure out how do we develop the plan. Involves countless hours and a lot of time and effort that, quite honestly, it gives us a position to be more in a place where we are attending to all of the real needs that we have, as opposed to everything that we have to do administratively just to get a meeting scheduled and agenda organized and have all of that done. They're taking care of all that for us. They're also helping create that collaborative environment which really lends itself then to say, hey, we're learning from every other district that's engaged in this work. And I see us as actually being in a real position of developing as fine-tuned and as effective of a plan as you'll be able to see anywhere. And so we want to set ourselves apart in that process, as opposed to just piecemealing a plan based on the work of everybody else and kind of a random assortment of what we put together. The other thing that allows us to do is really have the right energy and effort focused in the right ways as we prepare for what needs to happen in August. So I think there's a lot that goes into all of that, Tiffany, and it's a little bit of an investment from that regard, but I think the return on it will be really positive advantage for our students, our staff, and our entire community in that respect.
Thanks, Casey. I'm sorry to I feel like I'm monopolizing this conversation, and I don't mean to, but I do want to share my perspective in that I haven't seen a single person say that we don't want to get back to normal if we could. I think everybody that's ideal, at least from my perspective. But we also I recognize the parameters we have to work within. And so I do appreciate the effort that has already gone into what can we do to meet the needs of the families that need to learn in person. And I want to make sure that we are meeting the needs of our students that are on IEPs and 504s, our students that may be on the autism spectrum that have sensory issues, to our students who are needing extra boosts in speech or reading and writing. And I also I think that's great news from what I heard from Lori today, that we're also looking at how can we as a school district meet each student right where they are. If a family doesn't feel comfortable interacting with other students, then they have an online option. And families that want and need to have their students in a classroom, and teachers that need to be in a classroom, that we're doing what we can within the parameters that we can work within to get us there. So I really appreciate that. And I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Anything else on this topic?
Quick question for you, Dr. Summers.
Please.
And if this is redundant when I was accidentally bounced off, my apologies. I think as a community, occasionally we neglect to remember that we're under the state of emergency, and that creates unique requirements on the school system to abide by an incremental set of rules and regulations. As you go forward, are there things that we should be thinking about, both as a board and as a community, in terms of considerations if the state of emergency continues or if it's lifted?
Yeah, I think the best way for me to put a statement around all of that is it continues to be an evolving situation, as we know. So as we hear those updates and what things look like currently, as we're in still a safer at home state, and as changes could be made on that as we go into later into the summer, we're just going to have to continue to remain nimble and agile in terms of what are those guidelines as they present themselves. One thing I would point out, and for those of you that have had an opportunity, I'm not sure if you saw the CDE Colorado Department of Education framework and toolkit for those planning purposes. They've done a nice job, at least in their initial statement, saying here's what's absolutely required by law that we would have to follow. Here are considerations and suggestions. So for example, I know one that is really just low lying, Tiffany brought it up earlier, is just to wear masks or not to wear masks. And to what extent is that highly suggested, or to what extent is that going to be required? So that would be one example, without me giving a definitive statement on that right now, that I know everyone's eager to know, well, will my kid be required to wear a mask? Will teachers be required to wear one? And so that is just an opportunity in our system to say, what do we know about all of the research, all the data that we're working with? How do we make the most informed decision, recognizing that that decision, even as we make it, may be subject to revision as we keep going. So the frame that was utilized yesterday in our initial meeting with DMG, they made a real nice connection to the fact that something we have to be thinking about is our plans are going to be as innovative and as agile as they've ever been. And typically in public education, we spend a lot of time talking about all the different options and variables before we commit to a decision and before that's implemented. And so that typical time frame may end up being like a 6 to a 12 to an 18-month change type process, whereas this situation is really one where we're going to have to be ready to pivot and modify a plan, recognizing that flexibility will be the key in all of that. So I think hopefully that spoke to your point there, Ron. It's important for us to continuously be attuned to what those updates and those changes are, and then for our plans to reflect the type of adaptability that we're going to need to be able to implement really at any given point in our execution of that.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you. Anything else? Well, obviously there will continue to be updates that we will provide both for our community and for our board as we keep going forward. So please stay tuned, and thanks for the opportunity for us to share this information with you. And we look forward to a lot of productive work in the next few weeks.
Mr. Clausen, you're muted.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
I think we lost you for a second there, Mr. Clausen.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, we can.
All right. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what's going on with technology. Sometimes my phone's working, other times my iPad. But last agenda item is Board of Education calendar dates for 2021 school year. If you wouldn't mind reviewing those and then sending email to Kathy if any scheduling conflicts that you see. Everyone still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right. And then one additional item is we're scheduled to have our board meeting on June 15th. Would there be any objections due to a scheduling conflict if we move that meeting to June 22nd? I'm specifically looking for the input of the KC and the board members. Would that work for everyone?
That works better for me.
Okay. Chris? Chris? Okay, no issues from Chris. Ms. Phillips?
That works fine for me. It's still same time of day, correct? In the evening?
Same. And then Ron, how about you, Mr. Schwartz?
Yeah, I think just to confirm, you want to move it from the evening of the 15th to the evening of the 22nd?
Yep, same time.
Not a problem. I've already done it.
Dr. Summers, does that work for you, sir?
Does. Mr. Clausen, can I just ask one note of clarifying note, because this will also involve us changing the public hearing for the budget. Is that would that be the board's wish, is to still have that public hearing scheduled for the 22nd ahead of the official regular meeting?
That's a good question. I was just looking at my calendar where it shows our board meeting is on the 15th. So when is the reading of the budget?
It would be scheduled for just prior to the actual meeting. So that's just something I want to make sure we're able to update and communicate. And Ms. Namika, if I'm off on that, please correct me. I just know that there's two aspects of that we just have to be attentive to, correct?
Correct. We start the meeting with the budget information and opportunity for public comment regarding the budget, and then we launch into the meeting right after that. So it happens the same night.
Okay, so that's consistent with what we've done in the past. So let's move both to June 22nd, if that works for everyone. Okay, and Ms. Namika, if you'd make the appropriate changes and let the public know.
I will, thank you.
All right. All right, is there any other business that needs to be conducted this afternoon? All right. With that being said, once again, I apologize for all the technological difficulties. We'll try to figure out what happened and hopefully work through those glitches before our next meeting on the 22nd. But appreciate everything that you're all doing. And with that being said, we stand adjourned.
Thank you all.
Have a great day.